Roman Catholic, Jewish, and Protestant faith leaders have signed and submitted a letter to Congress urging lawmakers to pass the Smarter Sentencing Act, which is currently moving through the Senate with an accompanying bill getting started in the House. The act aims to dismantle mandatory minimum sentencing laws put in place decades ago for many low-level and non-violent drug offenses. It's all resulted in skyrocketing prison populations, reoffending rates, and massive taxpayer expense. According to the Federal Bureau of Prisons, as of April 2014, of the nearly 217,000 people locked up, more than 100,000 are serving time for drug offenses. The runner-up right behind that, only 32,000 inmates doing time for weapons, explosives, and arson. A 2013 report by the Urban Institute estimates that just two of the bill's provisions could save taxpayers $3 billion over the next 10 years. And that doesn't even take into account prison closures or abandoning new prison building projects. In the letter, the faith leaders urge lawmakers to support the Smarter Sentencing Act, citing their belief in the inherent dignity of all people, and that for far too long, Congress has ignored the consequences of the harsh sentencing policies it approved during the 1980s, and the disproportionate harm it has caused people of color and those convicted of low-level offenses. We are reminded that Scripture commands us, justice and only justice shall you pursue. Deuteronomy 16:20. Joining us to weigh in on the national conversation these numbers have sparked is Reverend Tiemeyer, Program Director for the National Council of Churches. Thank you very much for joining me this evening. Now, as your role as a faith leader, how does that help you to encourage passage of the Smarter Sentencing Act?
Well, thank you. I think it's important first to note that there's really broad support of this Smarter Sentencing Act, on both sides of the aisle in Congress, and broad faith support as well. And our role, particularly from the faith community, is to bring up the moral issues and the moral questions in terms of how our prisons have become places of mass incarceration, with disparities among racial incarceration numbers being very high among Black and brown people in our country. And the Smarter Sentencing Act will take some actions that will help us do some incremental changes to make this better. So as faith leaders, we call for justice. We call for the opportunity for restoring and restoration of people from prisons to their families. The Sentencing Act looks at addressing people who are low-level drug offenders in non-violent crimes. So to restore them to their families is important, and calling on the dignity of all people and the opportunity to be restored to communities is the message that we bring as faith leaders.
Let's take a look at inmates. Most of those incarcerated, according to the numbers, are relatively young men in their early 30s, and it tapers down from there. What are the societal effects of having this large number of young men who should be in their prime, earning power-wise, contributing to society? They're sitting behind bars. What is this effect having on society from your perspective as a faith leader?
Well, I think, first of all, it's also important to not only note that they're young men, but they are disproportionately men of color. And having them removed from the communities and out of the communities and separated from families is very destructive to our larger culture. And the opportunity in the Smarter Sentencing Act to restore people into their families, into their churches, into their communities, to provide for opportunity for them to continue to address their own drug addictions within a supportive and accountable community will help them become strong citizens who pay into the taxpayer base, who are a part of our larger culture and society. So moving towards restoring these young men into our communities fully is very important to us, and we want to, as a full culture, help to do this. And the Smarter Sentencing Act will be only one incremental step in making it there. The Smarter Sentencing Act looks at putting the sentencing levels related to where the Fair Sentencing Act back in 2010 placed them, so the disparities between crack cocaine and powder cocaine were lessened. Yet those who were already in prison, those changes in sentencing didn't affect them, and so this will give the opportunity for them to bring up their case to have their sentence relooked at. It's not like if this Smarter Sentencing Act passed, the doors of the prisons would be flung open. It's not a huge number of men who will be opportunity for release, and they will have to go through a process of review. And as I said, it's men who are low-level drug offenses and nonviolent crimes. I think it's also important to note that the increasing population of women in prison is happening as well. And so as we continue to look at all of our sentencing across the board, we need to keep both those populations in mind and look at laws that are just and fair and appropriate that help to bring about healing and wholeness in our community.
Well, if this bill passes and judges are allowed to give lighter sentences, less harsh prison sentences, that is, with more rehabilitative measures, do you think this will help reduce the high reoffense rates? Because, you know, it's widely known the faith community is a community that deals with a lot of rehabilitation with people who may have been dealing with addiction or are dealing with a former prison sentence and trying to get work. So do you think that judges having the opportunity to rehabilitate, will we see a big change in reoffending?
I think it will give the opportunity, yes, for less reoffending. The Smarter Sentencing Act still holds minimum sentences for offenders. It does give a provision that judges can look at where offenses have happened and the number of offenses and so forth, so it gives a little bit of breathing space there. But what's most important is it gives the judges the opportunity to find the best context in which rehabilitation can happen. Ultimately, drug addiction is not so much a crime as it is a public health problem. We need to have more opportunities for drug addiction programs, whether in prison or out of prison. We need to address the issues earlier on within our schools and earlier on so that we don't have this pipeline to our prisons. And having education for everyone and having drug addiction programs to help people from not offending are going to be the important part of growth of our culture and help to stem this issue.
Well, we will definitely see if letters like the ones that you helped to put together and that were sent to Congress will have an effect. Hopefully they will. Reverend Tiemeyer, Program Director of the National Council of Churches, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.